Welcome to Hospitality Connection, the podcast where we bring together hospitality experts, innovators, and leaders to share insights, strategies, and stories from the world of hotels, restaurants, and beyond. Each week, Scott Samuels and Alex Gould, your hosts, dive into the latest trends, challenges, and opportunities in hospitality, giving you practical insights and inspiration to thrive in today's industry. Let's connect, learn, and grow together. This is Hospitality Connection.
Welcome to the Hospitality Connection, everyone. Alex Gould, Scott Samuels here today with our friend Ben Potts of Unfiltered Hospitality. Now, Ben has a particularly unique background focusing on the bar programs. Now, one of my favorite aspects of a restaurant is the bar. In fact, I typically make a reservation as a backup in case the bar is full, because I think that's where you get a good glimpse into the world of the restaurant, how they operate, how they approach and treat the guests. And those team members, those bartenders are always on stage, so there's no hiding. And it gives you a real good glimpse about the inner workings of a bar program, of a restaurant's bar program, and I think of the entire establishment's training and philosophy of how they go about it. But before I go in any further and kind of kick off the show with some questions to Ben, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background, how you got into this, and we can go from there.
Yeah, sounds great. First of all, thank you guys very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here today. But yeah, how I got here, kind of a roundabout way, to be honest. So I'm a native Miamian, born and raised here. I've always been around hospitality, restaurants, hotels. I love them. It's part of the culture down here. It's part of our bustling economy. But I never knew I was going to be in this industry. In fact, I actually had no idea what I wanted to do, like any young Miamian. I love cars. So when I went to school, I went as a mechanical engineer. That lasted about an entire semester before I switched gears entirely. I was at Tulane for my undergrad, and they were like, look, man, if you can't cut it as an engineer, you can always try finance. I was like, that sounds awesome. So I went into finance on this master's of accounting path, and it was fine. You know, I was into it. My parents are both CPAs. I thought this could be a reasonable thing to do. Went through accounting, got trashed, like New Orleans got trashed by the Hurricane Katrina in 2006. Derailed my plans entirely. I ended up having to go directly to after that for a one-year MBA program, which led me to my first career, which was in investment banking. I don't know if you guys remember what investment banking looked like in 2008, 2009. Needless to say, it was pretty bleak.
Yeah, it's pretty rough patch.
Yeah. So I wasn't super happy with that, and I quit very unceremoniously. I was like, look, I'm just not going to do this anymore. After about 2 years in, had no idea what I was going to do. But I did have friends who worked in hospitality at the time. One of my close friends was actually the owner of a bar called Purdy Lounge in Miami Beach. And he was like, hey, man, I just fired my bar back. Would you like to work as a bar back at my dive bar? And I was like, 100%. That sounds amazing. I was like 24 at the time. And that was my first foray into hospitality, was as a bar back at a dive bar in Miami Beach.
With a couple degrees behind you.
Exactly. Kind of over the next 14, 15, 16 years, I went from bar back pretty quickly up to bartender, manager, quit that job after about 2 years to start my own recruiting firm, as it turns out. When I think I was 26, my mother had owned a staffing and recruiting firm in the finance and accounting industry. I thought, well, how hard could this be for hospitality? Turns out not easy.
It's not, right?
It's not easy. And also when you're 26 and you don't really have a company behind you, the credibility is also a bit of a challenge. But I took it. I enjoyed my time with it. But really, the bar called me back. And this was 2012 when cocktail bars were really picking up steam. And I got my first job cocktail bartending at Blackbird Ordinary, which was and still is a fairly popular bar. From there, I went to Broken Shaker, which I think a lot of people who like cocktails are very familiar with the name Broken Shaker, starting in Miami Beach, Chicago, LA, New York. And then I finally had the opportunity around 2014, 2015 to open my first restaurant with my business partners who wanted to open a concept that had both great culinary, great beverage, and a vibe that people just wanted to hang out in. And that was Beaker and Gray. Beaker and Gray was great spot, was around for about 9-10 years. And while we had Beaker and Gray, we also had the opportunity to open another concept, which was the Sylvester. We actually opened it as a concept called Boombox. Boombox was an epic failure. Within 4 months, we had to shut down, reconcept. But with any failure, you always have tons and tons of lessons and opportunities to grow. We opened Sylvester in April of 2019. And it's still kicking, doing very, very well. But that was pretty short-lived. 2020 was a challenging year for most people, unless, of course, you were like in the tech industry. And it's when all restaurants and bars had to close because of the pandemic, I was effectively out of a job. And so I found myself wondering what I was going to do. Fortunately, I had a skill. I was pretty good at developing beverage programs. I saw somebody on Facebook was like, hey, does anybody know any cocktail consultants? I need to make a new menu for my restaurant for when we open. We want to hit the ground running. I got in touch. They said, we love your restaurant. We want you to design our menu. And that was back in July of 2020. I started it with my now business partner, Guy, we actually worked together at the Broken Shaker. And that's when we kicked off Unfiltered Hospitality in July of 2020.
That's awesome. I think it's interesting. Like everyone in hospitality that looks at it now as a career, very few of us have started in that industry. It was something I did through college or something a family friend had a restaurant, so I helped them out. But it was, similar to you, it was nothing I really thought about until I got dragged into it when I was young. And I thought this is where I wanted to be. But I completely, can relate to your story about that pulling back into the restaurant scene and the bar scene. It's so magnetic and it's so charged with so much energy that it's really hard to get away from. Now, Ben, getting started here, when you walk into an establishment, you're walking into a bar, restaurant, what clicks for you in your head and signals you to say, you know what, this place has it together. They know what they're doing. Or in the opposite, what is it? What are those things that are like, oh, let me pump the brakes before I give them some money for goods and services here?
Right. So it's probably going to sound pretty obvious. And it's a lot of what all people, whether or not you have any kind of background in hospitality, notice when you walk into an establishment, bar, restaurant, hotel lobby, bar, wherever. First, it's the number of people in the room, right? You walk into a place and it's empty, save for in between meal periods, that's not a great sign, right? And that's incredibly obvious, but something that really, this one's probably a little more subconscious for most people is the greeting, right? And that can start anywhere, right? That can start if you're going to a nice place with valet, it can start there. It can start at the hostess stand. And if there isn't a hostess, if there isn't valet, it's 100% the bartender. When you walk up to a bar and the bartender does not greet you properly or with any kind of care, either they're unhappy, most likely because where they work is terrible, or they just don't feel it. Right. And in turn, you don't feel it as the guest. But immediately right after that, I look for organization, and we'll call it like a professional setup, right? If you look on the back bar and there's like check presenters everywhere, glasses are disorganized, all the back bar bottles have pour spouts in them. I'm sure you guys have been to all these bars. Like pour spouts because like they lost the cap, not because they keep all the back bar bottles spouted, but also the professional tool setup, right? Do they have like a set of cocktail tools next to them? And I don't mean to sound like you have to sell cocktails to have a well-run bar, but you do have to have a certain presentation of your station. You have to have your mise en place, right? And in the visible mise en place, have to be fairly well organized, and everything should please be clean. Bar top should be clean. The coolers should be organized if you can see inside of them. But the last thing that, especially if I'm walking into a place with cocktails, is a number of cocktails that look like specialty cocktails from the menu in the hands of guests. And that's probably the number one thing that tells me that this place is run well, because if people are ordering drinks off the menu, they're definitely running a place that's doing something right.
Yeah. That's an interesting point, because I know many times I'll run into a bar, sit down and be said to, what do you want to drink? Like, all right, well, you tell me, all right? Let me see your menu. Let me see what you're working with, and we can go from there. I think that greet specifically is one that is a deterrent from me staying for more than one. I want to be asked questions. What do you enjoy? What spirits you want? Light, shaken, and refreshing, or stirred and direct. All those things that kind of guide me through the culture of that bar. What about you, Scott? What do you look for when you first go into a bar?
A lot of the things that you were talking about that we don't typically see. It's mostly how you're greeted by the person at the bar, or how long you have to wait to even be acknowledged. And that seems to be a trend lately when bartenders don't even give you a courtesy. I'll be with you in a moment. They don't even look at you. And, that to me is a turnoff in terms of the operation. So it's mostly just the attention that someone gets as a guest when they come in. Are they greeted? Are they acknowledged? And if they're not, it just get a bad feeling that it's not well run.
Yeah. I'm always looking for dust too. Dust on top of like a lighting station or a lamp or a sconce. I just think that's like a huge indicator of how the place is being run. What about mistakes? What are mistakes, Ben, that operators are making when they're trying to create a craft cocktail program?
So there are many. But I think like some of the ones that really stand out to me is a really thoughtful development process is kind of where I think it starts. Something that we always really, really drive into. I've been actually going through and recreating a lot of our SOPs for the menu development process for a lot of our clients. And the amount of attention that is placed on who your guest is, what do they want, what do they drink, what do they like, and how that aligns with the concept is essential. Thinking about like the financial and operational targets that you have. So if you're of course everyone sets like a cost of goods target, but like how many people are setting like, well, I want to make sure that signature cocktails are 20% of our sales. Like, how do we get there? How do we back out of that number or back into that number? And then not really factoring in the capabilities of the team, right? Like the capabilities of the team, the equipment, et cetera. Like there are people who want these bar operators who want these like very like audacious grand programs, but they don't have the skill level of the staff to do it. They don't have the equipment that they need to execute it properly. And frankly, those just really, really fall flat. And I think like when you are designing a program, either for one location or even to scale it, if you're not thinking about those three factors, just going into it, you're already setting yourself up for failure.
So is there a portion that you can train up when you're setting the menu? Because obviously staff involvement is important in being able to execute what you put together. So when you go into an operation, are you evaluating talent level of the staff to see what they're capable of? And, does that affect your menu development when you're putting things together? How does it affect your menu development?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when we are developing the menu and assessing the skills of the team, generally speaking, the managers know, right? Like it's one thing to know what your team is capable of. It's another thing to design a program off of those capabilities or taking those capabilities in mind. So when we are designing the programs, we are always thinking about like, what are the skill levels? Most of the time we will have if the client or something, if an operator is already open and operating, we almost always go in for a discovery visit where we assess the team, right? We'll conduct it's almost like a secret shop, but we call it an audit, where we will audit all the things that we talked about, right? Like the cleanliness, the organization, the professionalism, the general skill level of the staff, how good they are at actually engaging with us or the other guests. And that will help us understand kind of what the baseline is and where we really need to focus on the development process.
And when you launch a beverage program and a menu, how do you get the staff to buy into what you're doing? A lot of times I'm sure it's sort of contrary to what they've done in the past, but how do you get their buy-in? How do you get them excited about the beverage program?
So the development aspect of it is a little tricky, right? Like when you are trying to engage a team of people who've been there for a long period of time, right? And so staff is kind of divided up between like your frontline staff, which are your bartenders, servers, and barbacks, and your management team. On the ideation process, it's always good to get input from the team as far as what they think will work. But I'm very cautious to recommend like a full staff tasting for feedback, Because if you get 5, 10 people who are all giving you feedback on what they like, what they don't like, what they think works, doesn't work, it can be like designing by committee, which kind of ends up with like this blob that isn't very interesting. It's essential that you only target key team members. And usually that's, the owner or proprietor, if they're available, or general manager is more typically who we're working with. Executive chef is a good one to engage. But when you are in the development phase, the staff can provide ideas on what can work, but actually getting their buy-in happens during the installation and training portion. Because when you are designing their stations for maximum efficiency, they have a lot of thoughts and feelings on what's great. We usually do that, and it's more of a more collaborative process where we engage them to say, this is your station. You work here every night. You know what works and doesn't work for you. You need to be able to execute this at a high level. Do this, walk us through how this works for you, and we're going to infuse our best practices into what you're trying to do here. And that's really where we see the most amount of buy-in, because they feel like they're part of the process.
Are you ever finding yourself in a position where there's just misalignment between the style of restaurant, the approach that they're looking to take, the level of elegance that they're looking to display in their bar program against the skill level that they actually have behind the bar?
Yeah, almost always, right? Like they have these, like I was saying, super ambitious programs that are misaligned, right? That there's a lot of people who want to win awards for their cocktail program. And I've won awards. Many of my friends have won awards. Some of our clients have won awards for things that we've helped them with. Awards are great. It's a good signal, but it is by far not the only signal that we care about, far from it. And if you are not taking into consideration your concept, what you want to offer, and trying to really align that, if you have a casual Mexican place, do not try to make a 50 best cocktail menu. It's just not going to mesh with what your guest is looking for. And certainly if you don't have access to the highest level of staff, don't design it that way. You can design any program to be executable by any staff if it's done on inception versus trying to engineer it on the back end.
Yeah. And I think when I see and hear awards, all I think about is super high beverage cost, right? I'm not sure if that's translating to profitability when we're having a 12, 15 ingredient cocktail that's, probably $8 to make, and we're charging $16-17 for it. There's a margin deficit there.
Do you remember when the bars, and I think a few bars still have this, but the pour stoppers, or they have the thing where the bottle has to go into a little machine that pours and it stops in an ounce or an ounce and a quarter. I mean, that doesn't seem to be the trend anymore. But I remember when it was, and my first bartending job was at Houlihan's. And Houlihan's, you order a Long Island iced tea, press Long Island iced tea, you put your glass under the dispenser, and all the liquor dispenses in the glass. That's how Houlihan's was, because they wanted to make sure that they had their bar costs aligned. But do you ever go into bars where they have, of course, the stoppers on the pours and all that? I'm assuming that's not something you work with that often.
So part of the financial, hitting financial targets is a major part of what we do, but we do that from the design standpoint because we're not there operating day to day. It's interesting. I've seen what you're describing a handful of times. It's certainly not that common, at least in this market. I'm trying to remember where I was. I was at it was a country bar. I think it was up in Cooper City. Roundup. Yeah, I saw it at Roundup once, and they had the thing that they had the bottle, they had the pour stop counter or whatever, and they just every time they changed bottles, they had to change the thing that this thing went on. Obviously now they have more advanced wireless versions of them, but I don't even see those very often.
Yeah.
I think
it mostly happened with chains, where the chains and the bar costs needed to be consistent, and that's what was happening. But I don't see it much anymore.
And I hear about them a lot in chains. Yeah.
I think now it's using jiggers or measured counting, and it's a lot. I think using a contraption to pour really takes the appeal out of watching someone make my cocktail. I know it's going to be consistent that way, but at the same time, you lose a little bit of the allure to it for sure.
Yeah.
Then when you walk into like a hotel against a restaurant, do you see them using their F&B facility more as an amenity or as a revenue generating area for a hotel currently in this market in Miami?
So Miami, I think, is somewhat unique in that like it's a beautiful destination, right? Like I go to markets like all the time that are not beautiful destinations, right? They're beautiful in their own way, but they're not like a tourism hub, right? Like I was in Wisconsin not that long ago, and I like Wisconsin is awesome. But I'm not necessarily going there for like rest and relaxation, except maybe to a couple places that are pretty sweet. Like there's we have a couple clients in Wisconsin, and I would definitely go there to hang out. When you come to a place like Miami, I think the hotels want to capture as much revenue as they can from their guests, right? Like I think the model here is like there are so many people, there are so many other tourists and other hotels that don't have great F&B that if they have the financial capacity and the ability to develop something that is going to be a major revenue driver, not just from their guests that stay at the hotel, but other guests in the area, they're going to do their best to capture them. So I see a lot of that happening in this market. I see that happening less in markets that typically have more business travelers or things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, going back to the people piece of this, how do you find teams are training for both technical aptitude and execution as well as guest engagement?
Yeah. So by far, it's building it into your training program from the start, right? Our training programs, for example, we spend an entire day on hospitality, service, guest engagement, right? We spend an enormous amount of time on it because it's kind of that was like literally the first thing that we talked about, right? The first thing that you see when you come into a bar is a great greeting and getting acknowledged and feeling seen. Training programs are essential for this, and designing that in at the beginning is important, but also maintaining it ongoing. It's not just like, okay, we designed a program, we're going to train you once. It's training. In my preference, it's daily training one way or another. It doesn't have to be like, you don't have to sit there for an hour every day, but daily, weekly training is essential. Evaluations are critical to validate whether or not the training's actually working. Like, of course, you're going to see that when you're on the floor. And if you're a good manager, you have a good management team, you'll be able to observe that, not just in the way that guests seem to be, but also what kind of performance you're getting out of them. Something that we like to track a lot is number of drinks per guest, right? And if you see that number going down, guest engagement is probably going down as well. So the guest engagement is essential, but the technical aspects of it, which are probably the parts that are more popularly trained on. If you're not training on all of them, I think you're missing a little bit of what makes a program work.
Now, weird question, but from a importance, is it easier to train someone who's got the right personality behind the bar, or is it easier to bring someone on who's very technically sound, but might be a little bit of a lone wolf behind the bar?
Well, I think we all know the answer to that question. Personality is a very difficult thing to train. Like you can do it. My personality when I first got behind the bar was a little shy and maybe not super engaging. Over time, like that developed, but I wanted to have that personality, and that kind of like that want to have that better experience or provide that better experience for people is huge. But you could be the best, most skilled, proficient bartender in the world, but if you have a bad attitude and you're too cool for school, skip it. There's way too many people out there willing to learn who want to do a great job, who maybe don't have the technical skills just yet. But again, going back to training with the right training program, you get there every time.
Yeah. It is nice to see. I mean, at least I've noticed this going out in South Florida in the past couple of years, that the ego behind the bar has been somewhat dismantled. I remember it used to be, you're at my bar, you're going to get what I get, you're going to drink what I give you, and there's going to be a little attitude there. Don't order off menu, and now I think people are there to please, and it's been quite refreshing, especially, I'll give you an example. I was at a bar, I was recently on my honeymoon, I was at a bar, and similar to the comment that you made before, this bar has won multiple awards. However, he goes, here's our menu, but whatever you want, please let me know. I'm happy to make it. And he went out of his way to get a special bottle of Lillet to make me a Vesper Martini. So it was a very, orchestrated event that he was delivering, head over heels on the hospitality front. Now, yeah. I know you and I have spoke about this offline, but psychology in guest decision-making, when it comes to what guests are ordering. Where do you land on that front?
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? Seeing the psychology of guest decision making firsthand, like as a bartender, I had many years of experiencing that. And now from where I'm at, where we are with designing programs, it kind of falls down to the same few things back then and still to this day. Trendiness is huge, right? So if there's a trending spirit category, like when I started bartending, it was all vodka, right? And that was every cocktail, that was every drink order. Now it's tequila. And some people are kind of getting into mezcal a little bit. Like, yeah, of course you can have people who order rum and whiskey and brandy. Like I love all the spirits, but trendiness is huge. And that doesn't just apply to spirit categories, but also cocktails, right? And so when people see an espresso martini on the menu, they're like, ooh,
I was just going to bring that up. If I see another espresso martini on a menu.
Right. Everyone has a variant. And like right now, it's like if you have a great house classic espresso martini, like just go for it. And like you can put it on the menu if you want. If you don't, it doesn't matter. People are going to order it. But if you really want to kind of lean into that trend, like go for it. That's a really big one. And something that I've always I think I invented it, or at least I didn't invent the concept. It's the term that I use is one that I only know that I use. But people really go for what I call power ingredients. So power ingredients would be something like passion fruit, especially in this market. A spicy passion fruit margarita is going to be the best seller on any menu, like almost hands down. Mostly because it's leveraging 1, tequila, a trendy spirit, 2, a power ingredient like passion fruit, and then a spice is kind of like it's kind of a power ingredient in its own sense. Like it's not an ingredient, it's a flavor, but if you put those things together, like pineapple's a big one, coconut's a big one. I mean, especially in South Florida, like the tropical fruits are really going to win. But you see those power ingredients, they do very well. But I think something that I think is overlooked a lot on menus is accessibility, legibility, and simplicity. Right? I see these like unbelievably long cocktail menus that are so complicated and just difficult to read. Like the font's too small, there's too many ingredients. The list doesn't make sense. It's like a list of like 15 things that have no way of breaking it up or segmenting them into compartments. Like, oh, this is like my before dinner drink. This is my after dinner drink. This is like my during dinner drink. That's always very helpful. If it's too hard to understand, people won't do it. Right? And they won't order from your menu. And if they don't order from your menu, they're not ordering from the very thing that tells the story of your concept and what makes you special. Like they're called signatures for a reason, right? They define who you are. And so if people aren't ordering those, that's a major problem.
How do you balance the development of the high quality craft cocktails with speed and efficiency? Because sometimes things look so elaborate. Bartenders almost like shrug when you order something because, egg whites in my, it takes so long. How do you balance that when you're coming up with a menu?
Right. You're going to notice a common trend here. Like it always comes back to like effective design, right? So designing with the idea that like, okay, I want to have a very cool and impressive cocktail that is high quality, delicious, and people want to order, but I also need it to be made in under 1 minute. Right? Like, so that's like very intentional targeting on operational objectives when you're designing your actual menu. And that also comes back to like your team and equipment, right? If you have one station behind your bar and you have a 250 seat restaurant and you try to execute a 15 cocktail program with mediocre bartenders, you're going to have an extremely difficult time doing that. So factoring in like what your, not just talent capabilities are, but your operational capabilities from like what your setup looks like, that's a really, really important part. Once that's kind of been designed, then you can go into efficient setup, right? So if you are using, if you want to make sure that every ingredient that's on your cocktail menu is within 1 step away from you, right? So that's just efficient design. And that's, again, something that you do hand in hand with the bartenders who are going to help you design this in a way that makes their job easier because everyone wants the same thing. And then finally, the speed of service. They're kind of hacks, but they're not hacks. Like I'm a major, or we are a major proponent of batching programs. So if you have a 7-bottle pickup, it's going to take you longer than if you can batch a certain portion of those non-perishable ingredients and have a 3-bottle pickup, right? And then you can engage with the guests, then you can get the cocktail out faster. They're more consistent. And a lot of the heavy lifting happens outside of service. And so if you put all those
that was
three
really my
together,
next question. When you talk about mise en place and making sure that, you had everything, prepped, but, with the garnishes and some of the prep work that goes into that, how much of that is planned before the bar actually opens? I mean, do you have all the garnishes and everything taken care of for each cocktail?
so that leads into kind of like what like I guess the systems that kind of allow that to happen, right? So once you have your recipes, you know what you're making, you need to really have a good understanding of how much you need to have available, right? So par sheets are super important, right? Like daily pars for every ingredient on your cocktail menu are essential. So those daily pars will dictate and that's, you set that based on your sales that you get from your POS. You use that to set your daily prep checklists, right? And those also, the ingredients that are required for those daily prep checklists roll up into your weekly order guides, right? So your daily pars, your daily prep list for prepping and batching, and your weekly order guides, if you have all those three things working in harmony, then you aren't running out of ingredients. You always have enough prep for every shift. And if you're taking into consideration what your operational capabilities are, you can make sure you can have backups behind the bar, easily accessible, whatever. That way you can run a high quality program at high speed and high volume.
You mentioned a few times systems and processes, training. What are the non-negotiable systems that an operation must have in place from your perspective?
Yeah. So after, let's say, the menu development portion is done, you've thought about all the things, all of your constraints between what your concept is, your operational, financial, et cetera. This has all been set and decided. You've created your cocktail menu. You've tasted it with the right stakeholders. Everyone's happy. Okay, so now you need what we internally call it a bar book, bar Bible, whatever. This is where all your recipes live. I mean, the number of times that I've walked into a place that doesn't, and I mean walk in and walk behind the bar, that doesn't have their recipes in a place that is easily accessible by all team members is appalling. It's a source of truth for all your recipes, for your prep, for your batching, et cetera, as well as your selling guides. So you can have all this stuff together and needs to talk to each other. Like we have a fairly advanced bar book spreadsheet that we use that's like 12 tabs long. This bar book will dictate those prep recipes and daily pars that I was just talking about. So a super comprehensive bar book that really touches on all of those areas is one huge one. The next one, I'm surprised I haven't said this word more frequently in this talk, but checklists. I'm the biggest proponent of checklists in the world. Like I have checklists in my personal life, in all of my businesses. They are essential for functioning properly. There's a book called the Checklist Manifesto that, like, you know how there are people who like to give out books, like, because they're like, oh, you should read this book. Like, you just always give out books. Like, that's the book that I want to give out. Like, that's my stocking stuffer because it's so good and so important for basically your life and any industry you're in. But those checklists paired with layout sheets, super essential, right? Like if you don't know where things are going to go and you don't know how much of things that you're going to need, like it's not going to work properly. Using the POS to develop a scorecard to really track those operational metrics that you set at the beginning of a performance scorecard will help dictate what's working on your program, where your cost of goods are, how much you're selling, what you're selling per guest, what percentage of your signature sales you're actually getting out to the guests. That's a big one. And then finally, like we talked about it, the ongoing training and evaluation programs, whether or not they're weekly, monthly, whatever, something needs to be in place so you are making sure that your team is executing properly all the time.
I couldn't agree more. I think the training piece is so overlooked, especially post that first, call it 90 days, right? You have a 90-day training program. Maybe it's a 6-week training program, whatever it is. But what happens after, right? How do you keep those people engaged? How are you continuously improving them? And I think that falls off the cliff a lot in hospitality, unfortunately. But it is an area that I think a lot of places can really capitalize on. And it builds retention, right? You want to keep people engaged, keep people excited, keep teaching them, keep educating them, let them learn in a way that you have as a leader. Now, if you could fix one issue in a bar program overnight, maybe you said it already, but what would it be? What would it be that, you go in there and here's the magic touch, this is going to fix this one
Mm-hmm.
problem for every bar that you've walked into, what would that be and why?
All right. And I'm going to cheat on this one. I'm not going to say multiple things, but I'm going to say one thing that falls under three different categories. Number one thing that I see people failing on constantly, and it really messes up their cocktail balance, they messes up like the guest experience, is how to use a jigger properly. Like bartenders have no idea. Like it's unreal. Friends of mine that have been bartending for 10, 15 years, I watch the way they use jiggers and how they measure spirits.
Well,
they're
now I'm
not doing it
curious.
right.
Show us.
Yeah. I just grabbed a jigger from back here.
Yeah.
No, I mean, really what it comes down to is when you're using your jigger, you have like the two sides or the two cups. They each hold a certain amount of liquid. On kind of like the more contemporary jiggers, they'll hold a 1 ounce and a 2 ounce, right? And then inside they have markings. They have 3/4 ounce, half ounce, 1/4 ounce, 1.5 ounce. What it comes down to is really just making sure that you are hitting your marks. People just don't do it, or they will like use the jigger and kind of pour in what they think is a half an ounce. Like I've seen people try to pour a half ounce from the 2 ounce side, which doesn't have a marking for half an ounce, drives me crazy. And then also when they're filling up the jigger, they won't fill it up all the way to the top. Like you have to go all the way to the top to get that 1 ounce or 2 ounce pour. And then I don't know when this started happening. This might be a little bit technical, but the drag pour, which is when you see somebody filling up a jigger and then they will dump the jigger and keep pouring.
Yeah. You may not like that. I like that a lot.
No, I love it. If someone's making me a 2 ounce, like if someone's pouring me something on the rocks, like go crazy. Or if like I'm going to get a stiffer drink, sure. But from a precision, cost control, like all the things, like fix that, like stop everything. Just if you can't get that right, then don't even try. Then the tool, like the actual like functional tool that I would recommend, just said it in the last one, but I really, really like checklist changed my life. The checklist, so essential, like an opening checklist, a closing checklist. I have prep checklists. I think at my bar, I still own the Sylvester. I think we have like 6 different checklists just in operating checklists, not necessarily just day-to-day, but day-to-day, side work, weekly. We have a deep clean checklist. Like
And a checklist to make sure you go through the checklist.
100%. The management checklist to check the check. You have to check the checker. If you're not checking the checker, then they're not going to do the checklist. I mean, I'm really, really, really big on the manager checklist. And I find like that's usually where the breakdown happens. But I would say if I could design one thing that would fix them all, it's something that I've been actually developing for the past few months. It's not quite ready for market launch, but essentially it is a daily training program that lives inside of an app, right? And it's fairly robust and complicated from a design standpoint, but from an execution standpoint, it's incredibly simple. Like if you could test your bartenders on between 1 and 3 cocktails a day from your menu, and you had like the system to do it, right? You had like the checklist to make sure that they are, smiling, engaging the guests, that they have all of the tools, ingredients, and so on. You're checking off all of these features that are so important. And if they are making it in the target amount of time, they're doing it in the correct order, they're serving it the right way, the drink looks exactly the way it's supposed to look based on a reference image, and they are following the steps of service as described. And you have a way of not just testing them, but also giving them a score, telling them what their score is, and having them consistently improve. That would be the ultimate. That's something that I have been developing for the last few months, and I'm super, super excited about it.
That's something that you're going to give to clients?
That's something that we're working on that we will be providing to our clients, but eventually I'd like it to be part of a larger ecosystem that kind of touches on all of the elements that we talked about today. But that's why I started designing that one first, because it's so essential for proper bar management.
And this has been really enlightening to me, because having managed restaurants, open restaurants, it always seems like the focus, well, not always seems it, the focus has always been on food, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that the bar piece has been discarded or put into, backup mode. The importance of having a bar menu that complements the restaurant, and it also, it's such a profit center when done properly, it is unbelievable. And, I think that just goes to the trends in the industry and how things are shaping with restaurants is that, it's not only a profit center, but it's brings people in, whether it be through happy hour or engagement. And I think that a lot of restaurants are still missing out on this opportunity and still cast it aside as not as important. But, what you shared today, I think, and hopefully the listeners will see that this is a critical element to this overall success of a restaurant.
Ben, where can people find you?
So you can find my company on Instagram or on our website. Our Instagram is at Unfiltered Hospo. Our website is unfilteredhospo.com. You can find me on Instagram at Ben Potts, just my name twice. You can also find us on LinkedIn with /Unfiltered Hospo or me /Ben Potts. Happy to connect with anybody, anywhere. I love to talk about this stuff. It gives me a lot of, makes me really happy to do so. And anything I can do to help anybody, I'm always here.
Awesome. Well, Ben, thanks so much for coming on. Love talking bar stuff. It's been a highlight for me in my career. I ran bar programs for a long time. So hearing it from an expert like you, gave some, kicks to my shin, but also some validation in some areas. So appreciate that very much. And looking forward to catching up soon, but thank you.
Thank you, Ben. This was awesome. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for tuning in to Hospitality Connection. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and connect with us on LinkedIn and other social channels to keep the conversation going. Join us next week for more insights, stories, and strategies from the hospitality industry, because when we share knowledge, we all grow. Until then, stay connected and keep elevating hospitality.